class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing Game 49 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the Buffalo Sabres, in which the Sharks have lost 5-2. And so the 3-game winning streak for San Jose will come to an end. They will suffer their first loss of the Logan Couture era, so since his return to the lineup. And what other team for it to come against than the Buffalo Sabres, a franchise who is not particularly deadly this season, not super dangerous, they're not even in a playoff spot, but for whatever reason, the Sharks have historically struggled against this franchise ever since the Sharks even came into the league over 30 years ago. Since then, it feels as though every Buffalo Sabres game has just been penciled in as a loss on the schedule. And it's made even more surprising by the fact that the Buffalo Sabres historically have been one of the worst teams in the NHL. They are on the longest playoff drought in the league with well over a decade of missed times from the postseason. And yet, for whatever reason, just as was the case 2 weeks ago when the Sharks lost to them 3-0, they were once again losers here tonight. And yet, this game started off quite well for San Jose, and it looked like they'd be well on their way to a fourth straight win, with goals from both Vlasic and Ruda relatively early on, two defensemen who have been on a relatively strong offensive hot streak as of late. So this 2-0 lead felt as though it could very well just be translated into a victory for San Jose. And yet, the major problem for the Sharks after this point was not that they completely fell off a cliff and the Buffalo Sabres completely dominated them, but instead that many of the major defensive issues that the Sharks have had the entirety of this season cropped up. And what's most interesting is that on the 4 goals that the Sabres scored on a manned net, because the 5th goal was on an empty net, we saw a unique defensive issue pop up for the San Jose Sharks. So let us start off with the first goal from J.J. Peterka. This is the one that cuts the lead in half and gets the momentum going for the Buffalo Sabres. This time around, it is puck watching in the defensive zone, as multiple players commit behind the net, trying to be the one player who will disrupt the play and be able to clear the puck out. Instead of anticipating of what the Buffalo Sabres players could do in this situation, they try to overcommit to forcing something to happen, which leaves Peterka all alone in front of the net for the easy tap and goal that makes it 2-1, still a Sharks lead. Still in the first period, however, it is Jordan Greenway who gets the game-tying goal to bring it to 2-2. And this is yet another unique defensive issue in the zone for the Sharks. It is a battle along the boards. If it is a battle that the Sharks win, they get possession of the puck, they easily clear it out of the zone. But instead, as has been the case many times this season, more often than not, the Sharks lose this battle, which allows the Sabres to move it in front of the net, create a 2-on-1 down low, and yet another pretty easy goal for Buffalo to get. And so it is a 2-2 game at the end of the first period. Then comes the second period, and again the Sharks, they're not playing terribly, they're getting some okay chances, they're just not really able to beat Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen in nets for the Buffalo Sabres, and it is the Buffalo Sabres who get the only goal of the second period, coming on yet another unique defensive issue. This time around, it is turnovers in the defensive zone as the Sharks seem to be trying to break out offensively. Nico Sturm attempting to find Mukhamadullin with a pass, but it is off the mark. It deflects off of a Buffalo Sabres skate, which allows the puck to stay in the zone, and eventually it is Alex Tuch through traffic who puts this one past Kakinen for the first Sabres lead of the game. So again, we first had puck watching in the defensive zone, then we had lost battles in the defensive zone, and now we have turnovers in the defensive zone. This fourth goal that the Buffalo Sabres scored, this one coming in the third period, the only goal on a manned net in the third period, as the Sharks still unable to beat the Sabres goaltender at this point. This one actually starts in the offensive zone. Ahutya gets the puck at the blue line and shoots this one wide, and this is a major issue that can happen sometimes when you miss the net. The puck will rim around the boards, come out of the zone, and allow for a 3-on-2 rush for the Buffalo Sabres up the ice. And this is then a combination of two major problems for San Jose this season. First of all, a weak back check from their forwards. It is, I believe, the second line that is on the ice at this point, Barabanov, Couture, and Duclair. There just is not as much of an effort as you would need to get this back and equalize this odd man rush. On top of that, it's just not the best coverage either from either Ahutya or Burrows on the 3-on-2, in combination with the fact that it is well executed by the Buffalo Sabres players, and it allows for yet another goal for them to give themselves a 2-goal lead, which is well more than enough for them to finish off this game with a victory for themselves. And like I said, the Sharks' winning streak comes to an end. And so, while it was a very nice start to this game with those couple of goals from unlikely players who've been playing well as of late, it was a pretty I guess, picture-perfect game when it comes to portraying the defensive issues that the Sharks have had this entire season. Moving on to the players to talk about, we have the exact same forward lineup again for the San Jose Sharks. Of course, this team has been winning over these past few games, so David Quinn doesn't necessarily want to change a winning formula, even though some of these lines haven't necessarily been rolling all that well. So let us start off here with the first line of Zetterlund, Hertl, and Hoffman, and it was a pretty underwhelming game for these three players for sure. Let us start off with Tomas Hertl, who I will say I thought played pretty well defensively. He had some decent shifts from a defensive standpoint. His penalty killing was also pretty decent, but the major issue and the reason you pay him the big bucks is that offensive play, in which just was not really there on a consistent basis here tonight. The same will go for his two wingers, Zetterlund, who you can usually rely on to get a few good shots on net. He had one really nice sort of toe drag type of move, which came relatively close to beating Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen in nets, but otherwise not a lot of that north-south very solid game from Zetterlund here tonight. When it comes to Hoffman, there were a couple of shining moments for him, a couple of really nice plays on the offensive zone, had a really close chance in the slot where he just shoots it over the net, and this was not even necessarily with his usual line. I believe it was Eklund on the ice with Hertl, or maybe even Nico Sturm at that point, but it was a very close call for Hoffman. Otherwise, though, besides that, just not exactly a lot doing with this first line, and yet the first line looked quite good when you compare it to the Sharks' second line on the night. As per usual for this combination of three players, Couture, Duclair, and Barabanov, yes, they were good for like a high danger chance here or there. For instance, in the first period, we saw Barabanov make a couple of very nice moves in the offensive zone to avoid pressure, get this puck in front of the net, and create a decent scoring chance in front. But besides that, there's just not really much of a consistent forecheck from these three players. There's not really any chemistry between them either, which is, you could say, to be expected. Couture hasn't played for the majority of this season thus far. Duclair is entirely new on the Sharks this year, and obviously hasn't played with Couture at all in the past, and very rarely with Barabanov as well. So there are excuses that you could give for that lack of chemistry, but this is still a second line at the NHL level, and these aren't just like three random players who you've tossed on. This is no longer a second line where the Sharks have to ice players like Nick Bonino or Matt Nieto. All three of these players deserve to be on an NHL second line. Barabanov slightly arguable, especially this season, maybe more so of a bottom six player, but Couture definitely a top six guy. Duclair definitely was acquired to be a top six guy for San Jose, and so at this point there really isn't any more excuses for these three players who just aren't giving a consistent effort. They were once again the worst line for the San Jose Sharks on the night, and that's not the first time this has happened. Then we get to the third line. Even though it was Vlasic and Ruda who were getting the goals for the San Jose Sharks, it was the third line from the forward perspective that were on the ice and helped create both of these goals. And in particular, it was William Eklund who stood out in a super positive way, had the primary assist on both of these goals. Now, not necessarily the beautiful primary assist where he finds Vlasic all alone for the empty net tap-in. Both of these are more so convenient that he managed to pick up the points. That doesn't necessarily mean that Eklund did not have a good game. In fact, he was one of the better forwards, if not the best forward, for the San Jose Sharks here tonight. His first period was outstanding. A few really, really good shifts, and while it slightly fell off as this game wore on, he still played a really solid game for the San Jose Sharks, and ever since being put on this third line, he has been one of the highest performing players for the San Jose Sharks, which has been quite nice to see. On top of that, we will also notice that the Buffalo Sabres did not score a power play goal here tonight. The penalty kill has been seeing some notable improvements for the San Jose Sharks, and one of the reasons, though definitely not all of the reasons, for that is the more heavy use of William Eklund in these situations. We even saw him be the number one penalty kill guy for the San Jose Sharks, as in the player who comes on the ice for the first shift on the penalty kill a couple of times here tonight, which was quite nice to see. Ever since dating back to even the preseason of this year, I felt as though Eklund could be an effective penalty killer, and for whatever reason there has been a hesitancy to use Eklund in this situation, but over these last couple of games he has been more used in a penalty kill role, and it has been working out for the San Jose Sharks. Just taking a look at the statistics, if we take players who have played shorthanded for at least 20 minutes this season for the San Jose Sharks, Eklund leads in terms of power play goals against per 60 minutes by a full 2.5 2.5 goals over the next closest player, showing that when he is on the ice for the Sharks in a penalty killing situation, very rarely compared to anybody else on the Sharks do the other team actually manage to score. So it definitely is a feather in William Eklund's cap that he's not only able to play well even strength, but also contribute from a penalty killing perspective. When it comes to the other two players on this line, kind of similar to Eklund, where I thought they both had strong first periods, Cunnin and Sturm doing some nice things. As the game wore on, while I do think Sturm kept up that level slightly, Cunnin did kind of fall off and wasn't super effective as I would say the last half of this game. When it comes to the fourth line, it was yet another very solid game from all three of these players. We saw Justin Bailey in his first matchup against the Buffalo Sabres a couple of weeks ago, since this was the team, I believe, that drafted him. He had a bit of extra energy there. That carried in here tonight as well. He was again a very solid forward for San Jose on this fourth line. Ryan Carpenter, I thought, also played quite good. And even Zadina, usually there seems to be like a fourth line player who kind of lags behind the other two. But tonight, all three of these players were rolling rather well, and while they wouldn't contribute on the score sheet, they were a solid and positive aspect of the game for the Sharks here tonight. From a defensive standpoint, we have the top pairing. I guess at this point it's really kind of in flux of which of these pairings you could call the first one, but I will say it is Vlasic and Emberson, and this was definitely the Sharks' best defensive pairing of the night. While there were struggles at times for the other two, these two players were, I won't say perfect, but were quite good from a defensive standpoint for the San Jose Sharks. Marc-Edouard Vlasic just looks like a completely different player over these last few weeks compared to what he has been not only in the first couple of months of this season, but for the last couple of years at this point. Vlasic has just looked unleashed thus far, not just from a defensive standpoint where he has looked calm, cool, and collected, but also from an offensive standpoint. He gets a goal here tonight, his third of the season, his third in his last 7 games, but on top of that, we saw not once but twice him jumping up in the rush extremely aggressively and coming close to scoring yet another goal in this game. You could have even argued, although it's a bit of a stretch for sure, that he could have had a hat trick here tonight with the chances that he had in this game. So a great game from Vlasic. Emberson, a slight step below, didn't have that same type of offensive output as Marc-Edouard Vlasic, but still very good defensively in his first game back in a while due to injury. When it comes to the second pairing, this is maybe what most people are interested in hearing about, and that is, of course, the NHL debut of Shakir Mukhamadullin for the San Jose Sharks. And his first shift from the get-go was a nice little impact shift for him. Immediately gets a shot on net, makes a big hit, kind of reminiscent of what Couture attempted to do to get himself engaged in the game when he came back from a long injury a few games ago. From a positive standpoint, the good news for Mukhamadullin, he is a big-bodied player, which is obviously quite nice to have as a defenseman. He's 6'4", if I'm not mistaken, so that's good. He has clearly an offensive element to his game. He's looking to try and make these sneaky type of breakout passes in his own zone. All of these things are good, and you could see that he has the tools to become a strong offensive defenseman in the future for the San Jose Sharks. But that then brings us to the bad news here tonight, where all of those things did not really come together at all. It was honestly kind of reminiscent to the debut, or not technically a debut, but the season debut of this year for Henry Thrun. When he was originally called up about a month ago, he also struggled in that first game, trying a bit too much in the defensive zone. Mukhamadullin very much in that as well. A few of those breakout passes were just intercepted. Not exactly the best defensive positioning in front of his own net. He's pretty good, but when it comes to activating along the boards, does get slightly lost in the offensive zone. While he is getting those shot attempts towards the net, they're kind of weak and not necessarily amounting to much. The creativity offensively wasn't super apparent here tonight for Mukhamadullin. Maybe that was a messaging from the coach to try and just keep it very, very simple, but perhaps it was even too simple at times for Mukhamadullin here tonight. And on top of that, while I mentioned his size in terms of his height being effective, his weight and in general his strength is something that is slightly lagging behind. If you take a look at William Eklund, for instance, he is coming in at 5'11", and it's a player that many people complain about being able to be pushed off the puck a bit too easily. William Eklund is 5'11", coming in at 181 pounds. On NHL.com, Mukhamadullin is 6'4", listed with just 178 pounds of weight, meaning there is definitely some growing to do in terms of the muscular variety for Mukhamadullin, so he can better be able to box these players out. We actually saw on the Alex Tuch goal, Mukhamadullin unable to clear the front of the net. Yes, you do have to admit it was against Jordan Greenway, who's one of the more difficult players in the NHL to be able to move from the front of the net, because he's like 6'6", 230 pounds. So there is obviously going to be a struggle there, but that extra level that Mukhamadullin can get to just physically over these next couple of years as he continues to grow into his body. And then finally, we have the third pairing for the San Jose Sharks. Okhotiuk and Burroughs were just an absolute disaster here for San Jose. I believe they were on the ice for 3 of the 4 goals, and they were directly responsible for 3 of these 4 goals as well. It is, I believe, Okhotiuk, or perhaps it was Burroughs, I can't remember which one, who overcommits behind the net on the first goal. It is Okhotiuk who loses the battle along the boards on the second goal. It is Okhotiuk and Burroughs who just do not have the proper coverage on the 3-on-2 for the San Jose Sharks that lead to the 4th goal. So just generally a really bad night from both of these players. And then we get to the goaltender for the Sharks, Kaapo Kähkönen. He lets in 4 goals. It's not great, but really all 4 of these goals are going to be really, really tough saves. It's just bad coverage in front from the San Jose Sharks on a couple of them. The Alex Tuch one, he's entirely screened by 2 very tall individuals, so you're not going to be able to easily see the puck in that situation. And so I do kind of forgive Kähkönen for a lot of these. Not the worst game from him, but that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Tuesday, where I believe they will be taking on the Anaheim Ducks, if I'm not mistaken. So a rematch from a few games ago. Last time it was the San Jose Sharks who were victorious. We'll see who comes out here on top this time. Class dismissed.